welcome everybody. I hope you're having a good day. And so this will be my first Zoom actually holding the meeting instead of being an attendee. So bear with me, but I'm going to get my video to share. And so it worked smoothly earlier. And so we'll hope again that it will. And it looks like I've lost it. Okay. You all will have to tell me if you see the screen. Are you with, is it coming up to where you can? Okay. All right. So let me hide my thumbnail. Okay. So here we go. My husband Chris and I, as Phil said, are the co-owners and operators of Beyond Blessed Farm in Abingdon, and we purchased our farm in 2008, just to give you a little bit of background about us. And we started with 10 sheep because that was what I thought that we could handle, and so we were excited for that. But we planned on it being a hobby, and then after a few years we realized that we wanted to move to seed stock. So currently we have 100 ewes and 30 replacement ewe lambs, and the majority of our 2020 lambs are registered. But we do a pasture-based flock with grain supplementation and rotational grazing between multiple species, mainly cattle, beef cattle. So our sheep currently graze on 30 acres. And we do the breed for the parasite resistance because Katahdins are known for that. So we have done that since we started. And so we have not had to deworm our mature ewes in about 6 years or any of our lambs. And we had about 120 lambs last year. So just to give you some background, but I want you to know that just because I am talking about small ruminants, I'm including and mainly talking about sheep. I am including the goats as well. So I want you to know that I focused on sheep because that's what I raise, but most of this, all of this can apply to the goats. So in thinking about preparing for fall breeding, this is the time now when we need to start thinking about it. It's hard to imagine. We're almost into August now. So this is a critical time. And what choices we make now will influence the next 8 to 10 months of the year in our flock. So as for replacement lambs, it will influence the next 8 to 10 years. It can. So the choices are very important. Keep that in mind. When we consider our choices, we will be looking at lambing percentages, the weight of the animals coming out of breeding and lambing, and the genetics for years to come. So we don't want to overlook these missed opportunities and regret it. So just remember that when you're thinking about your breeding program and what you want to do and your goals that you have in mind. Okay, so think about the profit. And our goal is to be sustainable, whether we raise whatever small ruminants we raise, whether it's sheep or goats. So we need to be profitable. That means we need to think about how many lambs are we having born, the number of those, the weights, including the birth weight, weaning weight, post-weaning weights. We take record of all those, and the growth rates of the lambs, and of course the conception rate of the ewe. So that is very critical. The time that she needs to be bred is on that first heat cycle. All right, let's think about some other things. Of course, our RAM is important when it comes to the body condition score, and we'll be going through each of these individually. So know that as we go through, but also the genetic potential. breeding soundness exam is an option that can be done. And with the ewe, in that case, her body condition score as well, genetic potential, and her udder health are very important. And in talking about the ram, going to the physical exam, we need to check his feet to make sure that he doesn't have something going on, such as foot rot or some kind of foot condition that would be harmful to him, that his feet are trimmed and in good shape. And his conformation, the way he is built, because he will be the one that will be mounting the ewe and doing your breeding, so you want him in good condition. The FAMACHA score, which that is an indication of whether you're checking the eyelid to see whether it's pale or whether it's a bright pink to red color, which is what you want, so that you know that the ram is not anemic. So FAMACHA scoring, I'm not sure if any of you all have had a training on the FAMACHA, but they do offer some. The University of Rhode Island offers training, and the VSU through Dr. Dahlia O'Brien does offer some information on FAMACHA, and so it's available for you to take an online class even. But so we want to know whether, by checking the eyelid of that sheep, whether we might need to deworm. 5 is severely anemic, so on that end of the scale, you either want to see a 1 or a 2, and you would decide to deworm at 3 or 3, 4, or definitely 5 is what you don't want to see. So in thinking of that, just the general overall health of the ram, whether his eyes look good and bright, we want something that looks appealing and doesn't, his ears are not drooped, he doesn't look sick, and it's not a bad idea just to open his mouth, check for any tooth issues or any gum problems or anything of that nature. So the overall health. And then going down to the next section, the history. If the ram has had a history of a fever or some other disease, it could affect the temperature of his testicles, which could lead to infertility for up to 60 days. So it's hard to imagine that, but that is a factor. And then body condition, I'm going to show you a chart here in a moment about this, but it should, at the time that you turn the ram in, his body condition should be between 3 and 3.5 out of the 5. So I will show you some pictures of this in a moment. If he's too thin, if the ram or the billy is too thin, he will not have enough stamina. The conception rate will fall off toward the end, and if he's too fat, on the other hand, he will have less energy, and the conception rate will also decrease. In looking at body condition score, as I said earlier, the scale from 1 to 5, so I've given you some diagram here to look at, some pictures, excuse me, I went too far. Okay, if you look at the picture, 1 is emaciated on our scale. So a body condition score of 1 in the lower left-hand corner, that ewe is a number 1. So ribby, gaint, just not what we want to see. And then you go to 5, the obese, which is in the right corner at the far bottom, are some examples of that. But the body condition scoring just assesses the amount of body fat on the animal, and you can perform a body condition score by feeling the amount of cover or the fat over the ribs and the spine. So if you notice in the top picture with the wool sheep that are quite woolly and have not been sheared yet or shorn, you will notice that it would be hard to just visually assess that those wool sheep. So you will need to actually physically feel along their spine and ribs to see what their condition score would be. All right, so again, the body condition scoring gives an assessment of the muscle and fat on the animal, and that in turn is going to be the energy reserve of that animal. So as I said earlier, you can determine this by feeling the hand, running your hand to feel the muscling and the fat over the vertebrae in the loin region. So that means from the last rib to the hip bone. And the next diagram, I'm showing you, so a body condition score of 1, if you'll notice in the picture, it's actually the first one up at the top, it has nothing. So it is no fat and very little muscle. And then the second one down, a small amount of muscle, but no fat. And then the third one, good level of fat and muscle with rounded ends of the ribs and the top of the backbone. So 3 is ideal. Remember, between 3 and 3.5 is what you want to see. Going on down to the 4, over, round, across the backbone. So you're looking at almost, it looks like a horse's rump is what I think of it. Lots of muscle and fat, and you're getting to be too much at that point, obviously. And then you can't feel the backbone at all for number 5. So definitely not the ideal. On the next screen, or the slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about the National Sheep Improvement Program, and I'm not sure, there may be some of you on here that participate in the NSIP, is the acronym for it. That is just a genetic selection system, and Dr. Fletcher and I use that at our farm. He loves to look at NSIP and to put our numbers in for our own sheep. We enrolled in the program in 2016, and it's been really helpful for us. Not only is the Katahdin breed in the NSIP, there are other wool breeds, and hopefully the goat people, I think there may be something for you all similar to NSIP. Of course, this is just for sheep, but this program provides a measurement of the traits. You can track them. They're called EBVs, and that is, EBVs are the value of the individual animal. So I know cattle have their own setup similar to this, but then you have EPDs as the breed value of the animal's progeny. So you're able to see both of those. So this program, being in this program, or purchasing a ram from this program, or an animal, a ewe even, allows us to select for the parasite resistance, growth, maternal traits, and carcass quality. So if you were selling your animals for meat, like we do our Katahdin sheep, some that we don't sell for breeding. So it's a good program. All right, let's talk a little bit more about the ram. And I had asked Dr. Fletcher if he would step in on this part, but he's left it to me. So I'm going to. He did actually help me compile this video, and I'm grateful for his help. So anyway, this is something that's very important to think about on the ram side. the scrotal health. So the scrotum, it is something that is important to examine. It should be healthy, and no wounds, should move, the testicles should move freely, should be firm with no lumps or abscesses. And then it's important to make sure there's no evidence of scrotal hernias. That has been something that in the past has been a problem for some folks I have known of. And so it is, that is something that's hereditary. So that animal, if the case of having a scrotal hernia, that for that ram would likely need to be culled because it is an hereditary trait. So make sure of that. The scrotal circumference, we participate in the Virginia Tech parasite, the RAM test that had been at Glade Spring. They're not able to have it this year because of the COVID, but in years past we have, and they actually, when those rams are on test, they will do the scrotal circumference. So when you purchase something somewhere like one of the research station tests through a university, they are able to get that information for you and do those tests. And so mature rams should have a circumference of 33 centimeters and ram lambs around 30. So keep that in mind when you're looking at either purchasing a ram or looking at your own ram if you are planning to breed with him. And you may want to consider getting a breeding soundness exam on your rams. And this is one way, it's the only way to check for semen quality. So of course, this is performed by a veterinarian, and they're going to check for the healthy sperm and the motility of the sperm. And so the semen is collected and analyzed with the microscope. So about 10 to 15% of rams nationwide fail this breeding soundness exam. And it should be done 1 month prior to turn in for the rams. So in the picture, you'll notice a marking harness, and you may have used one. We have used one before. Premier Sheep Supplies sells these, and so they're a good way to monitor your breeding of the rams and to see which ewes have been bred, and you can monitor for repeat breeders to know if the ewe may have missed and something going on there. So moving along, as a rule of thumb, for the ram, for breeding purposes, a mature ram, one mature ram should be able to breed around 50 ewes, and a yearling ram about 25 to 30, so about half that. And then a ram lamb, we don't like to see more than 15 or 20 be put to have a ram lamb. Try to breed them. So it's better to have more than enough ram power and get the most lambs on the ground in the least amount of time. That's the goal. So we split ours up into smaller breeding groups. Last year we split into 5 breeding groups for our ewes in the flock, and we had 15 to 20 ewes per breeding group and 1 ram in each of those groups. So that's a good way as well to spread your genetics more across the flock. All right, so think about a ewe missing the heat cycle, just one heat cycle. So I've given you a little information about this, and let's just use this example. If the lamb's daily weight gain is about 3/4 of a pound per day, and it takes 17 more days for you to get bred, then that means you've lost 12 3/4 pounds that you're missing out on of weight gain. So if the average dollar per pound is about $2.50, then that's $31.87, almost $32 that is lost per lamb. So then you multiply that by how many ewes miss the first cycle, and that adds up quickly. So if your weight gain is more than that, or you're breeding up to get higher weight gains, then the cost goes up even further. So in other words, you don't want them to miss even one heat cycle. All right, let's switch to the ewes. When we think about our ewes, there's of course similarities for things we need to look at before we go into the breeding of the ewes. But let's talk about the physical exam for them. So we're going to check their feet in conformation as well. And we're going to make sure that they can be mounted by the ram, of course. Do the same thing with their feet as we did with the rams. Just check them for soundness, for lameness, any foot conditions. And the FAMACHA, which going back as a review was the eyelids, checking to see how pink that they are, the color of them. And remember your scale from 1 to 5. So you do not want to see below a 3, 3, 4, or 5 on that again. And the overall health of the ewe. So at breeding, again, they should be 3 to 3.5 for your body condition score, if you go back and think about our chart. And if they're lower than that, that means their heat cycle could be messed up, delayed onset of it, lower conception rates at birth with the first breeding, and then the fewer eggs shed at ovulation. So obviously fewer lambs born per ewe. All right, let's talk about nutrition here. If we're breeding ewe lambs, they should be on a good nutritional plane, obviously, because they're going to need to continue to grow and to become pregnant at the same time. So you need to consider those two factors. They need to be at least 65% of their mature weight at breeding. So say if your ewes are around 150 pounds, your mature ewes that is, then your ewe lambs need to be about 100 pounds at breeding. So they need to have that time to grow. All right, so this is the hardest thing for me. Of anything that I do with sheep, this is something that just tears at my heartstrings, and Dr. Fletcher has to be the voice of reason for me because I am such a softie. But it is very important before you formulate a breeding list that you first take out the problem animals. And believe me, it does help. It makes lambing go so much more smoothly. I know from experience. So in thinking about which ewes might need to be culled and doing your checklist about a month or so, about right now, we will start looking over our ewes and decide which ones we're going to keep for breeding, and then we're going to be doing culling for the others. Because we'll put our rams in to breed and do our breeding groups in late August, early September. So think about the ewes that have a good history of these problems, or that have a history, excuse me, and good records are the key to that. So record keeping, I can't stress that enough. That's not something that for most people is a very enjoyable part of raising sheep and goats, but it is important because you really save yourself a lot of headache and just make life easier. So think about the ewes that have any history of udder problems. That could be obviously mastitis, hard bag, anything that the ewe has experienced or problems either during lambing or after lambing, you're going to notice then. Anybody that you've had to bottle feed because the mama didn't have enough milk probably needs to go on the call list. Thinking about birthing issues such as has that lamb been so large that mama had to have a C-section, or has she prolapsed before she gave birth, or prolapsed after she gave birth? So prolapse at our farm always equals cull ewe, all the prolapse girls. So think also about those ewes that have missed years lambing. So something may be going on with them. They're not cycling well. They're just not doing well in general. So think about those for the call list. And any singles, if you have ewes that have single lambs, and I know that some people think, well, we cull really heavily, but you have to at times consider that and let them go unless they're first-time mamas. If they are, because a lot of first-time mamas will have singles. And then think about ringworm. I don't know how many of you have heard of it, but that's when the cervix does not dilate fully at the time of birth. So that usually results in either the ewe definitely not being able to have it without a lot of help, and usually the veterinarian has to come, and it's not a good situation at all. Sometimes the ewe doesn't make it. Sometimes you lose both the ewe and the lamb. C-section is one of those. This is a time for the C-section. So think about it this way. If these ewes are being kept in your flock and you're going to continue to have issues with this, then you're already behind before you even start lambing. So that's the sad part of the story. And so it's better to just go ahead and cull and save yourself that, as hard as that is. Okay, I have some pictures on this slide of the one on the right I'll start with, and that's the example of the prolapse for the ewe. And so that's the scenario where you would either, if you can get the prolapse in, you would use that retainer. If not, the veterinarian would have to come, and you see, they call it like the spoon. So it's in the picture with the blue around it. You'll see that, and the before and after on the ewe. So that can be quite tricky to keep in at times, and that those harnesses and retainers, and then a lot of times there's certain ones that spoon that the lambs can lamb while the ewe has the spoon in. It'll push out when the lamb comes. So they're somewhat safe at, I guess you could say. Yeah, we've had some luck with those at times. Look at the picture. This is showing the proper placement of the teats on the udder. So that's important that you think about that when you're talking about the udder health. And so the number 5 in the middle is the optimum for the placement for the lambs to do, or the kids to have the best nursing abilities and chances when you have at least triplets as well. So you want to make sure they're uniform, that you have the milk in each side, and monitor that as you're looking. Okay, so getting back to another section on udders here. So you need to examine them. It's very important, as it was with the ram, just examining him physically, to do an udder check on the ewes. So prior to weaning and putting her, or post-weaning, excuse me, and prior to putting her on your breeding list. So this can reduce a lot of lambing problems for yourself. You're going to look for mastitis and for cording in the teats or lumpy hard udders. So to check for corded teats, you just simply roll the teat between your fingers, and if it feels hard, then this means it's a corded teat. So it just could be plugged, and this is not a good scenario as well. So be aware of the poor placement. We saw the picture in the last slide with that. If you have some teats, multiple teats, and the bigger teats than usual. So call any of those udder problems. It will save you in the long run. All right, so let's talk a little bit about nutrition. So we've talked about the ewes and the rams needing good nutrition. We need to steadily increase this prior to and several weeks into the breeding season. So it not only affects the number of lambs, but can also contribute to weak lambs at birth, lower birth weights, and higher death losses. None of those, you don't want any of those. So none of those are a good scenario. The ewe nutrition has a huge effect on the colostrum quality and quantity. So if she has gotten adequate nutrition prior to lambing in the several weeks, at least in the breeding season, she's where she needs to be with body condition score and quality of her feed and just monitoring her, then that's going to enable her to have the colostrum she needs to feed the lambs or the kids. So a ewe with a body condition score of 2.5, which was on the low end for being it wasn't emaciated, but too thin, she would need 10 weeks on good grass to get up to 3.5. So we need to identify these ewes early because it is hard to play catch up for them. So another thing we need to remember is about the minerals. We feed the high quality minerals, and we actually feed the mineral with the Zen Pro, and that is for the feet, for healthy feet. And it is well worth the money to spend to buy the Zen Pro, the mineral with it, because it is definitely, we've seen a huge difference in ours since we have fed that. And if you have questions on where to purchase that, you can contact me or look that up online. I can help you out. Okay, when we want to talk about flushing, to flush or not to flush, well, what is flushing? It's just increases the nutrition prior to breeding. So there's some ewes that benefit from flushing. There's some ewes that do not. It will increase ovulation and conception. It can increase the number of ewes that will cycle in the heat cycle, and it will increase lambing rates, the estimate, by 10 to 20%. So that's also putting money in your profit. You're being sustainable. So the deal is you need to supplement high quality grass and hay, grass or hay, and grain daily for 2 weeks prior and up to 2 to 4 weeks after breeding. So does, we're talking about goats, the does may need to start 4 weeks prior to breeding. And when you think about forages high in legumes such as alfalfa, red clover, white clover, they may have higher estrogens and they may act to prevent heat cycles, as well as moldy hay. That can happen with hay. So be careful of those, some of your forages that may impact and interfere. Talking a little bit more about flushing, flushing the main focus with it is increasing energy to the ewes So we want to increase their body condition score. So most people use corn. I've seen any good quality feed is okay, but you're going to use a feed a pound or half a pound to a pound per head per day is what you're going to want to do if you're going to flush your ewes. And so the greatest effect with flushing on the ewes will be your ewes that are below your average desired body condition score. So it's a proven fact that there's almost no effect if the ewes are at optimal body condition score. If they're a 3 or 3.5, when you're filling them along their spine and their backbone and those ribs, and they're 3 or 3.5, then you're basically wasting your money flushing the fatter ewes. And after the first month of gestation, you can go ahead and lower your nutrition level back to the maintenance level. So what you were doing prior to flushing. So it could be a good idea to sort ewes into different groups, especially if you have ewes that are a wide range on your body condition score, so that you can focus on flushing those lower animals that have the lower body conditions, that need a little more TLC, in other words, to get up to the level they need to be before they're breeding, so they can continue to gain weight. All right, so the last thing I'm going to say about the flushing and is the RAM effect. And this is also something that some folks do when they have non-cycling ewes, they can be stimulated to ovulate when the RAM is introduced. So this may be something that will be helpful for you. The ewes will ovulate 3 to 4 days on the silent heat, is what they call it, after the RAM is put in, but they will not breed on this heat. So then you'll have the first heat again in 17 days. So Dr. Fletcher can answer any questions about this. If you have any, just put them in the chat box as well. And this can be done by using a teaser ram, so a vasectomized ram, to get past the silent heat, and then you put in the breeding ram. So the rams have to be isolated away from the ewes for at least 6 weeks prior to the breeding, and this helps with synchronize your ewes. So this can be helpful. Some people put cedars in, I've heard of that, and to help the synchronization process for the breeding. So it's really not a good idea to continuously allow the ram to run with the ewes. All right, let's move on to pre-lambing vaccines. And in talking about them, vaccines are important. I have seen firsthand the importance, of course. All of our sheep, we do this 6 to 8 weeks prior to lambing. We give the CD&T to the ewes, and type A, we do go ahead and give that now because Dr. Fletcher has seen type A in our area, and I'll talk a little bit about it here in just a moment, about what it is. It's something that we didn't used to need to worry about, but it is seen now in sheep and cattle. So the vaccinations go into the colostrum to protect the lambs. So the CD&T is very important, definitely to give them, even if you don't do type A. But type A, I'll go over it in a moment. But when we're talking about vaccines in the CD&T family, the Clostridium, you have the blackleg, and so just a little bit about these, excuse me, just a little bit about the blackleg, or the Clostridium. It's a normal inhabitant in human and animal intestinal tract in the soil. So it has the shortest reported generation of time of any bacteria. and that's 6.3 minutes. So it is responsible for human food poisoning in the US, and it can cause tissue death, it does, and gas gangrene. And there's 5 types according to the toxin produced. So you have A, B, C, D, E, and F on those Clostridial perfringens. Now, all of those types all can cause blood poisoning, enterotoxemia. So this type C and D, that's when they ingest excessive amounts of feed or milk in the young, or of grain in feedlot lambs, or used with singles. So that's also called overeating disease, just to put it simple. So the treatment is your C and D antitoxin. So you saw a picture of that in the first slide that I showed you. And so that's overeating disease. That's why we vaccinate for that, C and D. The Clostridium perfringens type A. So this is type A that I mentioned earlier, the vaccination that we have for it now. And unfortunately, type A is found in the soil and normal inhabitants of human and animal intestinal tracts. So they say that this can be in the soil and it just can stay there. But the age of the animal does not appear to be a factor from what has been, research has been done, and from what Dr. Fletcher has seen. It causes lesions in the small intestines, so basically blood poisoning. And it's a bad deal. It's really bad. We have seen it before, unfortunately, a few years ago. We've had to experience firsthand experience with type A, and it's just wicked. It can develop from feed changes because it shifts the pH in the gut. Can have increased intake of bacteria from the soil. So that means it increases at times the wet times, the rainy times, and you'll see more increases with type A disease in the humid times, such as we're in. So it does not pass from sheep to sheep, fortunately. That is a plus with it. So it is not contagious from sheep to sheep. So type A, the clinical signs, and looking for, I didn't put any pictures here because I thought I'd spare you, but you'll just find the sheep dead for no reason, no good reason. They will experience abdominal pain, diarrhea. Once the symptoms start, the death can occur within 12 hours. So very quickly, it's like 1 minute they're fine, the next minute they're not. They're not alive. So their abdomen bloats just before or right after their death. So I know Dr. Fletcher has necropsied or cut some of these open to see and to send off to the lab to have tested. So that's something that if you suspect you're having trouble and you can't figure out what's going on, call the veterinarian, try to do some research and see if you can have some testing done to see what's going on, because it can hit several in the flock or the herd if you're dealing with cattle, and it just can really do some damage. Okay, at this point, I am at the end of this slide and going to ask for questions. I'm going to stop sharing and get back to the main screen. So everyone's still with me. Okay. Do we have questions in our chat? Mr. Field?
Let's see. Don't see any in there right now. If anybody has a question, you can type that into the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and just ask.
I have put my email in the chat box. The very first, I think, our farm email. And so please reach out to me if there's anything. If you think of a question later that you want to ask, I'm glad to. If I don't know, I know Dr. Fletcher can find out, or we can find an answer for you.
Sherry asked for clinical signs on type A other than diarrhea, and possible treatment if not vaccinated.
Right. So there's not a lot of clinical signs. To be honest, that's the unfortunate part. You usually just find them dead, and that's the hard part. And until you cut them open and send the results, send the parts to the lab, and you know, you can look in the intestines, and like I said, the kind of green substance. I know Dr. Fletcher's seen some weird things go on. I know the gas, he says there's a lot of gas in the intestines when he cuts them open, and you know, but ultimately sending them to the lab to see what they have to type it out to see what's going on, and they have to do all their tests. And the state lab in Wytheville is where those parts are sent and the testing is done. But can type and she asked another part of that question. I'm sorry, I forgot what that was, Sherry. The second part about vaccinating, was that correct? Or
it's like impossible treatment if not vaccinated.
The treatment, there's very little treatment. I'll have to get back to you on that. As far as, you know, what you can do, usually it's really hard to find them in time to treat them, just to be honest, Sherry. So giving them the vaccine ahead of time is your best option, to be honest, because they really fade fast. And that's about all I can tell you about that.
Yeah. Dustin asked if type A can be transmitted.
It is not transmitted from sheep to sheep. Is that, I think that, is that what you're asking, Dustin, or are you talking about human?
He said yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's not. So it's in the soil, and that's what they've discovered about it. So the treatment, other than getting these vaccinations and trying to prevent, maybe at some point they'll come up with something that they say it can live in the soil in those conditions a lot.
And John asked, so are goats typically susceptible to these same diseases?
I saw where Dr. Fletcher answered that he has never seen any in goats. So let's see, let me pull up my box here. He's never seen a goat with type A. So that's a good thing for you goat producers. So encouraging.
Any other questions?
Is the vaccination given to the ewe prior to lambing along with the other vaccinations? So the answer is yes. You will give the CD&T and type A, both of those before lambing. And again, to the lamb, yes, to the lamb directly. So yes, 6 weeks after the lambing, we always give our first shots. So every lamb of ours comes in the barn, and gets bonds with mom, and then gets the navel dipped. And so it's an intensive setup, but you can monitor things, and then we'll bring everybody back in. And when we do our first weighing, or our next weighing, then we'll give our vaccines at 6 weeks. And so, yes, they get that then. The lamb gets the type A and the CDT, of course. How much effect does the ram have on multiple births? That's it. Dr. Fletcher's better with the genetics, and I'm going to let him answer that for you, Sherry. Effects the ram has on multiple births. Sure, we'll give him just a minute. I'm sorry. Not as much as the ewe. So not as much as the ewe, Sherry. They have more effects on the multiple births. Should we always be breeding with the ram that has a twin or a triplet? It is better to, yes, we have a lot of folks, well, the ewe releases the eggs, so that has more to do with the multiple births, but there are several folks that will not purchase a ram that is a single, has been a single lamb and grown up to be a ram. They will not use him for breeding because, you know, it does have some effect, but of course the ewe has more. It's harder to manage if you let, in answering Amy's question on why is it not a good idea to let the ram stay with the ewes for a longer period of time. Well, for one thing, the management of it, your breeding, your lambing period is going to be extended longer, and your ewes will not be cycled. If you can be home, if you don't work you know, job outside the home, both of us have full-time jobs away from the home as well, and from the farm, and so we do not want to lamb all through the year. We want to just lamb. We lamb January through March, and so the sooner, the closer together that lambing time can be for us, the easier our life is, and it just gets the ewes synchronized. And you know, if you do keep, you know, lambs in with ewes, and the ewes have, you don't separate the ewes with lambs, you know, you have a danger of the ram possibly hurting one of the younger lambs or something like that. So it's a management issue. To answer your question, it makes life easier. A single for the first time mama is okay. A single ram lamb, if you're looking at that. So I don't know where that question came in, but yeah, it may be, how long are you keeping the rams in with the ewes? So we leave ours in from when we put it in, say the 1st of September, you leave them a lot of times about 45 days is what we do. So at least 30 days you want to leave them in, but longer than that if you can for breeding. That was Sherry's question, wasn't it? Or keeping the rams in with the ewes. That's what you meant, wasn't it, Sherry, for breeding, for your breeding groups when you do that?
Yeah, I know Mandy had typed in her email at the beginning. It's at the top of the chat box. I just copied and pasted so it's so you don't have to scroll all the way up. But are there any other last questions? If not, I'm sure you don't mind if they email you a question later. But I appreciate very much you and Dr. Fletcher speaking to our folks tonight, and it's been a good program. And I think this was well attended. We have one of the broadest geographical ranges at this one I think we've had in a while. So appreciate you doing that.
Thank you all. I appreciate you, and please email me if you need anything, or and I will get back to you with an answer. And if you need anything as far as if you're in Southwest Virginia, I'm doing the small farm outreach up to Smith County and then over to Lee County. So 9 counties within there. I'm sorry I can't be in Kentucky, but I can answer questions for sure. So just email me and I'll find an answer for you if there's any help, if I can be of any help.
All right, thank you again. And as far as next week, Shad and Jeremy, I think we have Monday and Tuesday next week, right?
Monday and Tuesday, switched it up.
On Monday, we have you all may have participated in the Black Bear interaction with Seth Thompson from Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries. He's going to be coming back Monday and talking about black bear biology. And then I think it's a UK specialist in forestry, right, on Tuesday.
Exactly. Forest health.
Forest health.
And also talking about the current mass crop and some other things. So it should be a good one.
Okay. Good deal. Well, thank you all again, and we're going to bow out of here and hope you all have a great evening.
You do as well. Thank you.
See everybody next week. Thank you, Mandy. Thank you, Mandy, and thank you, Dr. Fletcher.
Anytime. Thank you.